Mother Bear wandered into a locked garage. The baby who let her out put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning air in Pine Ridge was unusually crisp for early summer. Olivia Bennet stood in her kitchen, washing breakfast dishes while keeping a watchful eye on her 15-month-old daughter, Emma. The little girl sat on a colorful playmat near the sliding glass door, babbling happily to her stuffed animals. Their home sat at the edge of the community, where manicured lawns gradually gave way to dense woodland, a boundary between civilization and wilderness that most residents respected with cautious admiration. "Look at the birds, Emma." Olivia pointed toward the feeder hanging from the porch eave. A pair of cardinals darted back and forth, their brilliant red plumage catching the sunlight. Emma's eyes widened with delight, her tiny fingers reaching toward the glass as if trying to touch the colorful visitors. Neither mother nor child noticed the large shadow moving along the side of the house. In the garage, Noah Bennett had left the side door propped open earlier that morning while organizing his tools. He'd been meaning to repair the faulty automatic door mechanism for weeks, the one that sometimes closed without warning. A half-eaten sandwich and open can of soda sat forgotten on his workbench, remnants of a quick snack before he'd been called inside to answer an important work call. The scent of food drifted through the open door, carried by the gentle breeze into the surrounding woods. It was this tantalizing aroma that had caught the attention of a hungry mother bear. She had 2 cubs hidden safely in a den half a mile away, and the promise of an easy meal was too tempting to resist after the long winter months. The bear hesitated at the edge of the trees, her powerful nose twitching as she assessed potential danger. Her deep brown eyes scanned the unfamiliar structure before her. Hunger finally overcame caution. With surprising grace for such a large animal, she lumbered toward the garage, drawn by the promise of food. Inside the house, Emma suddenly stopped playing. Her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Olivia noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor but thought little of it. Babies were constantly discovering new sensations, new sounds. She turned back to the dishes, humming softly. "Almost done here, sweetie. Then we can go for our walk," Olivia called over her shoulder. The bear entered the garage cautiously, each heavy paw placed with deliberate care. The sandwich was easy to spot and easier to consume in a single bite. As she explored further, her massive body bumped against a stack of paint cans. They clattered to the concrete floor with a thunderous crash. At that exact moment, a gust of wind swept through the open door. In a cruel twist of fate, it pushed against the faulty automatic door sensor. With a mechanical groan, the main garage door began its descent, the rubber seal at the bottom eventually meeting concrete with a definitive thud. The bear was trapped. Startled by the sudden confinement, she let out a distressed huff, spinning in confused circles. Her powerful paws scraped against the door, seeking escape. Inside the house, the strange sounds finally registered with Olivia. She frowned, setting down the dish towel. "What in the world?" she murmured, moving toward the interior door that connected the kitchen to the garage. But before she could reach it, the landline rang. It was Noah, calling from his office upstairs. "Hon, can you bring me that folder from the counter, the one with the blue tab? I need it for this conference call." "Sure, just give me a second. I think something fell in the garage. It's probably just the wind knocking things over. This call is important and they're waiting for these figures." Olivia hesitated, then grabbed the folder. "I'll check it after I bring this up." She headed upstairs, leaving Emma still sitting by the glass door. The little girl had gone very still. Her eyes were fixed not on the birds anymore, but toward the side of the house. She could hear the muffled sounds of distress, sounds that resonated with something primal in her developing mind. Without the physical coordination to express what she was feeling, Emma did what came naturally. She began to crawl toward the source of the sounds. The bear's panic was escalating. She rammed her shoulder against the garage door, causing the entire structure to shudder. Tools rattled on pegboards. A bicycle hanging from ceiling hooks swayed precariously. The bear's powerful roar, though muffled by the walls, carried the unmistakable sound of fear. Emma had managed to navigate from her playmat to the kitchen. The door to the garage was not completely closed. Noah often left it ajar for air circulation. The little girl's determination propelled her forward, one hand-knee coordination at a time. Something was wrong, and in her simple, pure understanding of the world, wrong things needed to be made right. Upstairs, Olivia handed Noah the folder. "I really should go check that noise," she said worriedly. "Just give me 2 minutes to get through these numbers," Noah replied, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "Then we'll both go look." Back in the kitchen, Emma had reached the garage door. Her small fingers pressed against the wood, pushing it open just wide enough for her tiny body to slip through. The sliver of light that fell across the garage floor caught the bear's attention immediately. The massive animal went still, her breath coming in heavy puffs that clouded the air. Emma paused on the threshold, her innocent eyes meeting the wild, frightened gaze of the mother bear across the dimly lit space. In that moment, something extraordinary passed between them. A recognition beyond species, beyond the boundaries of wild and tame. Two mothers' children, one present and one waiting in a distant den, connected by the universal language of vulnerability. The bear's massive head lowered slightly, nostrils flaring as she caught the baby's scent. Emma showed no fear. She couldn't comprehend the danger before her. Instead, she did something that would later leave everyone who heard the story in disbelief. She smiled. A toothless, drooling grin that somehow cut through the tension like a ray of sunlight through storm clouds. "Bah," Emma cooed softly, the simple sound echoing in the garage. The bear tilted her head, ears flicking forward at the strange noise. Her powerful muscles, previously coiled tight with panic, seemed to relax incrementally. She took a hesitant step back, creating distance between herself and the tiny human. It wasn't fear that motivated this retreat, but something closer to respect. An ancient instinct that recognized innocence. In the quiet neighborhood outside, Eleanor Whitaker was walking her terrier, Max, along the sidewalk bordering the Bennett property. At 72, Eleanor's morning walks were sacred routine, her way of staying connected to the community she'd called home for 40 years. Max suddenly stopped, his small body going rigid as his ears perked up. He let out a series of high-pitched barks, pulling frantically against his leash toward the Bennett's garage. "Max, what's gotten into you?" Eleanor tugged gently, trying to redirect her normally well-behaved companion. But Max was insistent, his barking growing more frantic. The old woman squinted toward the house, noticing nothing unusual until, was that a child's cry coming from the garage? Inside that garage, the dynamic had shifted again. The bear, startled by the distant barking, let out a low, rumbling growl. Her eyes darted nervously between Emma and the walls of her prison. The baby, sensing the change, let out a whimper of confusion. Her small hands clutched at the doorframe as she tried to maintain her precarious sitting position. Upstairs, Olivia's maternal instincts suddenly flared with alarm. "Noah, where's Emma?" Her voice carried an edge of panic that made her husband immediately end his call. "She was on her playmat," he replied. But the certainty in his voice wavered as he saw the fear in his wife's eyes. They rushed downstairs together, calling Emma's name. The kitchen was empty, the playmat abandoned. Then Olivia noticed the garage door, open just enough for a small body to squeeze through. "Oh my God," she whispered, her heart seizing with terror. At that exact moment they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a wild animal's growl, followed by their daughter's frightened cry. Outside, Eleanor had made a decision. Something wasn't right. She tied Max to a nearby mailbox post and approached the Bennetts' front door, her aged knees protesting the hurried pace. Her finger jabbed at the doorbell repeatedly. Inside the garage, a critical moment was unfolding. The bear, increasingly agitated by the barking dog and the baby's cries, had begun pacing in tight circles. Emma's whimpers had escalated to full tears, her initial curiosity replaced by the instinctive fear response to the bear's threatening sounds. Yet remarkably, she didn't retreat, perhaps unable to coordinate the complex movements necessary to crawl backward. Instead, Emma did something unexpected. She reached into the pocket of her tiny overalls and pulled out a half-eaten cookie, a treat Olivia had given her earlier that morning. With a shaky hand, she extended it toward the bear, an offering made without comprehension of its significance. The garage fell silent except for Emma's sniffling. The bear stopped pacing, her attention fixed on the small morsel in the even smaller hand. The contrast was striking. A massive predator capable of crushing bones with a casual swipe, facing a fragile human child offering the only thing she had to give. "Emma!" Olivia's terrified scream pierced the moment as she appeared in the doorway behind her daughter. The sudden noise startled both bear and baby. Emma dropped the cookie, which skittered across the concrete floor, coming to rest halfway between her and the bear. Noah appeared behind his wife, face draining of color as he took in the scene. With painstaking slowness, he reached for his daughter, desperate not to trigger an attack. "Liv," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "Back up very slowly. I'm going to grab Emma." But before he could act, a new complication arose. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime bizarrely out of place in the life or death tableau. The bear reared up slightly, startled by the unfamiliar sound. Emma, torn between the comfort of her parents' voices and her fascination with the bear, remained frozen in place. "Someone's at the door," Olivia breathed, her entire body trembling with the effort of remaining still. "Ignore it," Noah commanded, his eyes never leaving the bear. "We need to—" His words were cut short by the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house, followed by Eleanor's voice calling out, "Hello? Is everything all right in there? Your dog is barking something fierce." The bear dropped back to all fours, her massive head swinging toward this new disturbance. In that split second of distraction, Noah lunged forward, scooping Emma into his arms and retreating in one fluid motion. Olivia slammed the garage door shut behind them, collapsing against it as her knees finally gave way. "There's a bear," she gasped, clutching her chest. "There's a bear in our garage." Eleanor stood in their living room, surrounded by the broken glass from the small window beside the front door that she'd smashed with a garden gnome. Despite her age, she'd acted with decisive courage when no one answered her increasingly urgent knocks. "A what now?" the older woman asked, eyes widening behind thick glasses. Outside, Max continued his frantic barking. Inside the garage, the bear renewed her efforts to escape, ramming against the door with enough force to make the walls shudder. Noah handed Emma to Olivia and reached for the phone. "I'm calling animal control," he said, punching in numbers with shaking fingers. But as the family retreated to the safety of the living room, a new horror dawned on Olivia's face. "Noah," she whispered, her arms tightening around Emma, who had begun to squirm and point insistently back toward the garage. What if there are cubs? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Bear cubs meant a mother's desperation would be exponentially more dangerous. It also meant there were potentially helpless baby bears somewhere in the woods, waiting for a mother who might not return. Emma continued to fuss, reaching toward the garage with increasing determination. "Bah," she insisted, her simple vocabulary somehow conveying a complex message. "Bah." Eleanor moved to the window overlooking the side yard. "There's something moving in the trees at the edge of your property," she reported, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. Noah joined her at the window, phone still pressed to his ear as he waited for emergency services to pick up. What he saw made his blood run cold. At the forest's edge, partially hidden by undergrowth, two small, furry forms tumbled over each other, bear cubs, venturing out of hiding in search of their mother. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice finally came through the line. This is Noah Bennett at 427 Pine Ridge Road. We have a mother bear trapped in our garage and he swallowed hard. Her cubs are in our yard. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated. A mother separated from her babies was the most dangerous wild animal scenario possible. As if to confirm this thought, the bear's assault on the garage door intensified, the wood beginning to splinter under the force of her desperate attempts to reach her cubs. Olivia looked down at Emma, who continued reaching toward the garage with unusual persistence. "She wants to go back," she murmured, confusion evident in her voice. "It's like she knows something we don't." Eleanor approached cautiously, her weathered hands gentle as she touched Emma's forehead. "Sometimes the very young see things more clearly than the rest of us," she said softly. "They haven't learned to be afraid yet." Noah covered the phone's mouthpiece. "The dispatcher says animal control is at least 30 minutes out. We need to keep everyone inside and away from windows." But Emma's fussing had escalated to full-blown crying, her little body arching toward the garage with surprising strength. "B.A.," she wailed, more insistent now. "B.A." The adults exchanged worried glances as the cracking of wood from the garage grew louder. The door wouldn't hold much longer against the bear's determined assault. The cubs outside had ventured closer to the house, their high-pitched calls seeming to fuel their mother's frenzy. "We need to do something," Olivia said, struggling to hold her squirming daughter, before she breaks through. That's when Eleanor, with the calm wisdom of her years, made an observation that would change everything. "Look at your daughter," she said quietly. "Really look at her. She's not afraid of the bear. She was face to face with it, and she's trying to go back." "That doesn't make any sense," Noah argued, but even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. "Children and animals," Eleanor continued, her eyes never leaving Emma's tear-streaked face. "They communicate in ways we've forgotten how to understand." A particularly violent crash from the garage punctuated her words, followed by the splintering sound of wood giving way. The bear was breaking through. "We need to get upstairs," Noah shouted, already moving toward the staircase, but Olivia remained rooted in place, staring at her daughter with dawning realization. "Wait," she whispered, so softly that Noah almost didn't hear her. "Emma was in there with the bear for who knows how long before we found her. And the bear didn't hurt her." Time seemed to slow as another crash echoed through the house. A hole had appeared in the garage door, the wood splintered outward by the bear's powerful claws. A massive paw briefly appeared through the opening, then withdrew to deliver another blow. "I know this sounds crazy," Olivia continued, her voice steadying with each word, "but I think Emma wants to help the bear. She tried to give it a cookie, Noah. She wasn't afraid. Eleanor nodded slowly. The girl has a connection. I've heard stories. Noah ran his hands through his hair in frustration. You can't be serious. That's a wild animal about to break into our house. We need to get somewhere safe until help arrives. The cubs' cries from outside grew more plaintive, their small bodies now fully visible from the window as they ventured onto the lawn. The mother bear's efforts redoubled, the garage door now severely compromised. Olivia looked down at Emma, who had never stopped reaching toward the garage, tears streaming down her chubby cheeks. In that moment, a mother's intuition overrode conventional wisdom. Noah, open the automatic garage door. What? Have you lost your mind? The bear isn't trying to get in. She's trying to get out, to her babies. Olivia's voice was calm now, certain. Emma saw it before any of us did. She tried to help. Noah stared at his wife in disbelief. And what if you're wrong? What if the bear charges into the house the moment we open that door? Then we'll be no worse off than we are now, with her breaking through anyway. Olivia shifted Emma in her arms, looking directly into her daughter's eyes. You wanted to help the bear, didn't you, sweetheart? Emma's cries subsided slightly as she gazed back at her mother. Bah, she confirmed solemnly. Eleanor moved to stand beside Olivia. I think she's right, young man, that Mama just wants her babies, same as any mother would. The next crash was the loudest yet, a portion of the door giving way completely. Through the jagged opening, they could see the bear's eyes, not filled with rage, but with desperate determination. Noah looked from his wife to his daughter to the elderly neighbor who'd broken into their home to help them. Then he made a decision that went against every rational thought in his head. The control panel is on the wall next to the door. I'll do it, but everyone needs to back away first. Olivia and Eleanor retreated to the far side of the kitchen, Emma still reaching outward from her mother's arms. Noah approached the garage access door cautiously, hand hovering over the control panel. Ready? He asked, finger poised above the button. Before anyone could answer, a new voice called from outside. Hello? Bennett residence? This is Officer Martinez with Pine Ridge Police. We received a call about a bear. The unexpected arrival of law enforcement added yet another layer of complication. Through the front windows, they could see a patrol car in the driveway, an officer cautiously approaching with his hand on his holstered weapon. He'll shoot her, Olivia gasped, horrified realization dawning. If he sees the bear breaking through, he'll shoot her. The cubs had scattered at the sound of the car, retreating to the edge of the woods but not disappearing entirely. Their frightened whimpers were still audible in the tense silence. Noah made a split-second decision. I'm opening the garage door, now. His finger jabbed at the button before anyone could object. The mechanical whir of the automatic door filled the air, drowning out the sounds of splintering wood as the bear continued her assault on the inner door, unaware that another exit was opening. Outside, Officer Martinez froze at the sound, drawing his weapon as the large garage door began to rise. Mr. Bennett, he called, more urgently now. Please stay inside. Inside the garage, sunlight flooded in as the automatic door lifted. The bear paused in her attack on the interior door, massive head swinging toward this unexpected development. Her nostrils flared, catching the scent of fresh air and of her cubs. Noah backed away from the control panel, rejoining his family in the kitchen. Now we wait, he said softly, and hope I didn't just make the biggest mistake of our lives. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. The mechanical door continued its steady rise. Officer Martinez advanced cautiously, weapon raised. The bear remained frozen between two possible exits, the hole she'd created leading to the house, or the opening garage door leading to freedom. Then came a sound that would stay with everyone present for the rest of their lives. Emma, who had been watching with unusual intensity for a 15-month-old, suddenly called out in a clear voice, the first real word she had ever spoken. "Go!" The bear's head snapped toward the sound, making direct eye contact with the baby once more. Then, as if taking direction from the tiny human, she turned and bounded through the opening garage door into the sunlight. Officer Martinez stumbled backward in shock as 500 pounds of black bear charged past him, missing him by inches. His finger tensed on the trigger, but he held his fire as the bear showed no interest in him whatsoever. Instead, she raced across the lawn toward the tree line where her cubs waited. The reunification was nothing short of magical. The cubs rushed to their mother, their previous fear forgotten in the joy of reunion. They circled her legs, nuzzling against her fur as she bent to inspect them, confirming they were unharmed. The little family lingered for just a moment at the forest's edge. Then, in a moment no one present would ever forget, the mother bear raised her head and looked back at the house. At the window, where Emma now pressed her tiny hands against the glass, watching with wide-eyed wonder. For 3 full seconds, bear and baby regarded each other across the distance, wild and tame, animal and human, yet connected by something ancient and wordless. The bear dipped her massive head once, almost like a nod of acknowledgement, before disappearing into the forest with her cubs. Inside the house, silence reigned. Officer Martinez holstered his weapon with shaking hands and approached the front door, which Eleanor opened before he could knock. "What just happened?" he asked, his professional demeanor momentarily abandoned in the face of what he'd witnessed. Noah found his voice first. "Our daughter," he began, then stopped, unable to put the extraordinary events into words. "A miracle," Eleanor supplied simply. "We just witnessed a miracle." Olivia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she held Emma close. "She said her first word," she whispered, kissing her daughter's head. "She said, 'Go,' and the bear listened." News of the incident spread quickly through Pine Ridge. By afternoon, local news vans had arrived to interview the family about their unusual encounter. Animal control confirmed that the mother bear and her cubs had been safely tracked to a more remote area of the forest, away from human habitation. The official report described the incident clinically. Female black bear accidentally trapped in residential garage. Escaped when garage door was opened remotely by homeowner. No injuries to humans or wildlife. But the true story, the one shared in hushed, wondering tones among neighbors and friends, was about a baby who somehow communicated with a frightened wild animal, who offered comfort instead of fear, who spoke her first word not to her parents, but to a desperate mother trying to reach her children. Dr. Rachel Chen, the wildlife biologist who arrived to assess the situation after the bear's departure, offered perhaps the most thoughtful perspective. "Bears and humans have more in common than we like to admit," she explained to the gathered news crews. "Both species are fiercely protective of their young. Perhaps on some fundamental level, your daughter recognized that similarity. Children haven't yet learned our adult fears and prejudices. They see with clearer eyes sometimes." As the excitement gradually died down and life in the Bennett household attempted to return to normal, Emma developed a new fascination. She began collecting stuffed bears of all sizes, cuddling them close each night as she fell asleep. And each morning, Olivia would find her daughter at the sliding glass door, looking out toward the woods with an expectant expression. "Bah?" she would ask hopefully, her vocabulary slowly expanding, but always including this first important word. "The bears are safe in the forest," Olivia would explain gently. "They're where they belong. But sometimes, in the early dawn light, Olivia herself would catch glimpses of shadows moving at the forest's edge. Never close enough to cause alarm, but present nonetheless, as if watching over the little girl who had, for one extraordinary moment, bridged the divide between their worlds. Winter came to Pine Ridge, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine, white wonderland. Emma, now 18 months old and walking with increasing confidence, continued her morning ritual of checking the woods. But the forest stood silent. The bears long since retired to their winter den. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell in gentle flakes outside the window, Noah finished installing a new security system, one that included upgrades to the garage door mechanism to prevent similar incidents in the future. "Do you think she remembers?" he asked Olivia as they watched Emma playing with a new toy bear under the twinkling lights of their Christmas tree. "I don't know," Olivia replied truthfully. "The human mind is funny about early memories. But I think some experiences leave marks on us in ways we don't fully understand." Later that night, after Emma had been tucked into bed with her collection of bears arranged protectively around her, Olivia stood at the kitchen window, gazing out at the moonlit snow. A movement caught her eye, something large and dark against the white landscape, at the exact spot where the forest met their yard. For just a moment, she glimpsed the unmistakable silhouette of a bear standing upright, front paws resting against a tree trunk as it gazed toward the house. Toward the window of Emma's bedroom, where a nightlight cast a soft glow against the curtains. Olivia held her breath, neither afraid nor alarmed, but filled with a quiet sense of wonder. The bear remained for perhaps 30 seconds before dropping to all fours and melting back into the darkness of the trees. She never told Noah about this visitation. Some moments, she felt, were too sacred to be analyzed or explained away. But whenever she heard the increasingly common stories around Pine Ridge, tales of a mother bear who seemed unusually careful to avoid human contact while still managing to be glimpsed just often enough to remind residents of her presence, Olivia would smile to herself and think of her daughter, who had looked into the eyes of wildness and seen not danger, but a reflection of something universal. The following spring, Pine Ridge implemented new conservation measures to protect the expanding bear habitat surrounding the community. Emma, growing more verbal by the day, continued to surprise her parents with her unusual empathy for all creatures. The incident became a cherished family story, retold on birthdays and holidays, growing perhaps a bit more miraculous with each telling, as such stories tend to do. But the truth needed no embellishment. For one perfect moment, a child too young to know fear had shown more wisdom than all the adults around her. She had seen past differences to recognize a fundamental truth, that a mother's love transcends species, that compassion requires no common language, and that sometimes the greatest courage comes in the smallest packages. And in Pine Ridge, where the woods meet the yards of human homes, residents now leave their garages more carefully secured, but their hearts a little more open. For they had witnessed something extraordinary. A baby who led a bear home, and in doing so reminded everyone of the unexpected connections that can form when we see each other not as threats, but as fellow travelers sharing the same wild, wonderful world. 5 years passed, and the story of Emma and the bear became local legend in Pine Ridge. Some details had been embellished over time, as is the way with remarkable tales, but the core truth remained untarnished in the Bennett family's memories. Emma was now 6 years old, a bright-eyed first grader with an uncanny affinity for animals that both delighted and occasionally concerned her parents. Her bedroom had evolved from stuffed bears to a menagerie of wildlife books, posters, and detailed drawings that showed remarkable talent for someone so young. Her kindergarten teacher had described her as having an old soul, quiet at times, but fiercely passionate when discussing her favorite subject, wildlife conservation. "Mom, can we go to the conservation center today?" Emma asked one Saturday morning in early autumn. Her legs swung rhythmically beneath the kitchen table as she pushed cereal around in her bowl. "Dr. Chen is giving a special talk about black bears. She said I could come." Olivia smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. Rachel Chen, the wildlife biologist who had been called to their home that memorable day 5 years ago, had since become something of a mentor to Emma. The connection had begun when Dr. Chen returned to the Bennett home a week after the incident to follow up and found herself peppered with surprisingly insightful questions from a toddler who could barely string full sentences together. "I think we can manage that," Olivia replied, wiping down the counter. "Dad has that meeting this morning, but he can meet us there afterward." Noah's voice carried from the hallway as he adjusted his tie. "Don't start without me. I want to hear about those new tracking collars Rachel's team is implementing." Pine Ridge had changed considerably since the bear incident. What had once been a community that simply tolerated its wild neighbors had transformed into a model of human-wildlife coexistence. The Conservation Center, built 3 years ago on donated land at the edge of the expanded forest preserve, stood as physical proof of this transformation. Noah, inspired by his family's experience, had joined the town council and championed the initiative. Eleanor Whitaker, now 77 but still remarkably spry, served as the center's most dedicated volunteer. She greeted them at the entrance that afternoon, her face lighting up at the sight of Emma. "There's my brave girl," she called, extending her arms for a hug. "Dr. Chen is setting up in the main hall, quite a crowd gathering already." Emma embraced Eleanor tightly. The elderly woman had become like a grandmother to her, their bond forged in that extraordinary moment years ago. "Is she bringing any of the tracking data?" Emma asked eagerly. "Maps, charts, photos, the works," Eleanor confirmed with a wink. She mentioned having something special to share today. As they made their way through the center, familiar faces nodded in greeting. The Bear family, as they were sometimes still called, enjoyed a certain quiet celebrity status in Pine Ridge. Emma had grown accustomed to it, though she sometimes puzzled over why people found her connection with the bear so remarkable. To her, it had always seemed the most natural thing in the world. The presentation hall was indeed packed, community interest in the local wildlife never having waned since the conservation initiatives began. Dr. Chen stood at the front, arranging materials on a display table. At 37, she remained as passionate about her work as she had been when Olivia first met her, though success had added a confident ease to her demeanor. "Emma," Dr. Chen called, spotting them in the crowd. "Come up here. I need my special assistant." Beaming with pride, Emma navigated through the rows of chairs to join her mentor at the front. Olivia found seats near the middle, saving one for Noah, who texted that he was running 5 minutes late. "Today, we're discussing the success of our black bear monitoring program," Dr. Chen began once everyone was settled. "And I'm particularly excited to share data about one bear family that many of you will recognize from local stories." A murmur rippled through the audience. Emma's eyes widened as Dr. Chen pulled up a slide showing a map of the forest preserve with colored tracking paths overlaid on it. 5 years ago, this female bear, whom we've designated F178, but whom our young assistant here has named Sierra, had a significant encounter with humans that could have ended tragically. Images appeared on the screen: the Bennett home, the damaged garage door, and a blurry photo of a mother bear with 2 cubs at the forest's edge, captured by a wildlife camera in the days following the incident. Conventional wisdom would suggest that this bear would either become problematic returning to human settlements for food, or would develop extreme avoidance behaviors due to trauma. Instead, we've documented something remarkable. The next slide showed tracking data spanning 5 years. F178, Sierra, had maintained a consistent territory that skirted the edge of human development, but never encroached upon it. The one exception was a single night each year, always in late December, when her tracking collar showed her making a brief approach to a specific location before returning to the forest. This annual deviation always occurs near the winter solstice, and always to the same spot, the edge of the Bennett property, Dr. Chen explained, her voice carrying a note of scientific wonder. In my 20 years of studying black bear behavior, I've never documented anything like it. Noah slipped into the seat beside Olivia, squeezing her hand in greeting. On his other side, an unfamiliar man in a rumpled suit scribbled notes furiously on a small pad. "Who's that?" Olivia whispered. Noah shrugged. "Some writer from a national magazine. The Conservation Board invited him. Thought the publicity might help with the expansion funding." Dr. Chen continued. "What makes this behavior even more interesting is that F178 has had 2 more litters since her famous encounter. And here's where it gets truly fascinating. She appears to be teaching her offspring the same boundaries and behaviors. New slides showed multiple bear paths, all observing the same respectful distance from human settlements, with the exception of that same annual approach to the Bennett property. It's as if," Dr. Chen said, her scientific caution momentarily giving way to wonder, "she's passing down a story, a memory." Emma stood beside Dr. Chen, her small fingers tracing the colored paths on a physical map, her expression thoughtful. When the presentation concluded and questions began, she remained quiet, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. As the crowd dispersed for refreshments, the magazine writer approached the Bennett family. "Jason Merrick, National Wildlife," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "I'd love to get your perspective on this remarkable story, particularly yours, young lady," he added, smiling at Emma. Before Olivia could mediate the interaction, Emma looked up at the writer with surprising directness. "She remembers me," she said simply, "and she's saying thank you." Merrick blinked, caught off guard by the child's certainty. "That's a lovely thought," he replied carefully. "But scientifically speaking—" "Some things can't be explained by science," Emma interrupted with the innocent boldness of childhood. "Dr. Chen knows that too, even though she doesn't say it in her presentations." Olivia placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. "Emma has always had strong intuitions about animals," she explained diplomatically. "We've learned to listen to them." The writer looked intrigued rather than dismissive. "Would you be willing to tell me more about your experience? The full story, not just the version that's made the rounds?" Noah exchanged glances with Olivia, a silent communication refined over years of marriage. "Perhaps over lunch," he suggested. "There's a cafe here at the center." As the adults arranged details, Emma slipped away, drawn to the large windows overlooking the forest preserve. Beyond the cleared area around the center, trees stretched toward the horizon, their leaves beginning to hint at autumn colors. Somewhere in that vast expanse, Sierra and her family were going about their day, eating, playing, resting, living their wild lives parallel to the human world that had learned to make space for them. "Looking for someone?" Dr. Chen asked softly, joining Emma at the window. "Do you think she knows I'm here today?" Emma asked without turning. Dr. Chen considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Bears have excellent sense of smell. Depending on the wind direction, She might catch human scents from quite a distance, but would she distinguish yours specifically? She paused. Science would say no. But what do you say? Emma pressed, looking up at her mentor. The biologist smiled, and the lines around her eyes crinkling. I say that 20 years of studying bears has taught me there's still much we don't understand about animal cognition and memory. She placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. And I say that connections between species sometimes defy our attempts to categorize them. This seemed to satisfy Emma, who nodded and returned her gaze to the forest. Later that afternoon, as the Bennetts were preparing to leave, Dr. Chen approached with a small package wrapped in brown paper. I was planning to give this to Emma at our next junior naturalist meeting, she said, but today seems more appropriate. Emma carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a small, weathered tracking collar. Is this? She began, eyes wide. Sierra's first collar, yes, Dr. Chen confirmed. We replaced it last spring when we updated our tracking system. I thought you might like to have it. Emma clutched the collar reverently, running her fingers over the scratched casing and worn strap. Thank you, she whispered. As they drove home through the golden, late-afternoon light, Emma sat quietly in the back seat, still holding the tracking collar in her lap. Olivia watched her in the rearview mirror, recognizing the thoughtful expression that often preceded her daughter's more profound questions. Mom, Emma finally said as they turned onto their street, can we go to the edge of the woods tonight? Just for a little while? Noah glanced at Olivia, eyebrows raised in question. It's getting dark early now, sweetie, Olivia replied cautiously. Maybe tomorrow in daylight would be better. But the tracking data shows she's most active at dusk, Emma persisted. Please, just for 15 minutes? The earnestness in her voice was difficult to resist. After dinner, as the sun began its descent behind the trees, the Bennett family walked together to the edge of their property where lawn gave way to wilderness. They stood in companionable silence, Emma slightly ahead, the tracking collar still clutched in her small hands. What exactly are we hoping for here, Ham? Noah asked gently after several minutes had passed. Emma shrugged, her eyes never leaving the shadowy spaces between trees. I don't know. Just to be here, I guess. Another 5 minutes passed. Olivia was about to suggest they head back when Emma suddenly stiffened, her posture alerting both parents to a change. Don't move, she whispered, barely audible. At first, Olivia saw nothing in the gathering twilight. Then, a subtle movement caught her eye, a shifting of shadows that resolved into a massive form partially obscured by underbrush. A black bear stood approximately 50 yards away, motionless, watching them with unblinking attention. Noah instinctively moved to pull Emma back, but she shook her head slightly. It's okay, Dad, she murmured. It's her. It's Sierra. The bear made no advance toward them, maintaining a respectful distance that nevertheless allowed for clear visual contact. For nearly a full minute, the tableau held, human family and bear regarding each other across a divide both physical and metaphysical. Then, a shuffling in the underbrush revealed two smaller forms emerging cautiously to flank the adult bear. Not tiny cubs, but juvenile bears, nearly grown. Offspring from a more recent litter than the one involved in the original incident. Emma slowly raised the tracking collar, holding it up like an offering, or perhaps a reminder. The mother bear tilted her head slightly, an eerily human-like gesture of recognition. She remembers, Emma whispered, absolute certainty in her voice. As if in response, Sierra rose briefly onto her hind legs, not in threat but in what almost resembled acknowledgement, before dropping back to all fours and turning away. With slow, deliberate movements, She led her adolescent cubs deeper into the forest, disappearing into the gathering darkness. No one spoke on the walk back to the house. Words seemed inadequate to capture what they had witnessed. That night, as Olivia tucked Emma into bed, her daughter finally broke the thoughtful silence that had persisted since their encounter. "Mom, I know what I want to do when I grow up," she declared, Sierra's tracking collar now hanging from a place of honor on her bedpost. "What's that, sweetheart?" "I want to build bridges," Emma said firmly. Olivia smiled, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Like an engineer, that's a wonderful goal." Emma shook her head. "Not physical bridges, bridges between people and animals, between everyone who thinks they're too different to understand each other." She yawned, her eyelids growing heavy. "Sierra and I built a bridge a long time ago. I think the world needs more of those." Olivia felt her throat tighten with emotion as she kissed Emma's forehead. "I think you're absolutely right." As she turned off the light and quietly closed the door, Olivia reflected on how a single extraordinary moment could ripple outward, touching countless lives. What had begun as a frightening encounter in their garage had transformed their family, their community, and perhaps most profoundly, their daughter. Outside, the forest stood sentinel at the edge of human habitation, no longer a boundary to be feared, but a threshold to be respected. And somewhere within its shadowy embrace, a bear who remembered a kindness shown by a child continued to pass that memory to her offspring, creating a legacy as enduring as the trees themselves. 10 years later, a 16-year-old Emma Bennett stood before a crowded auditorium at the International Wildlife Conservation Conference. Now, tall and confident, with the same penetrating gaze that had once connected with a frightened bear, she adjusted the microphone as photographs of Sierra and her descendants filled the screen behind her. The Pine Ridge Bear Project began with a personal encounter, she explained to the assembled scientists, policymakers, and conservationists. But it has evolved into something much larger, a model for coexistence that has implications far beyond our small community. In the years since that second encounter at the forest's edge, Emma had channeled her unique connection with wildlife into rigorous study and advocacy. Under Dr. Chen's mentorship, she had developed a community education program that had been adopted by towns across the country, facing similar human-wildlife conflicts. Sierra, now an elderly matriarch by bear standards, still roamed the expanded conservation area around Pine Ridge, her descendants comprising nearly a third of the local bear population. Each generation seemed to inherit the unusual respect for human boundaries that Sierra had pioneered, creating a bear community that thrived alongside rather than in conflict with its human neighbors. "We tend to approach conservation from a place of separation," Emma continued, her passion evident in every word. "We talk about saving them, as if animals exist in a world entirely apart from ours. What Pine Ridge has learned is that true conservation comes from recognition, the acknowledgement that our stories are intertwined." In the front row, Olivia and Noah watched their daughter with quiet pride. Now, in their 40s, they had supported Emma's unique path even when it led in unexpected directions. Noah had left his corporate job years ago to run the now nationally recognized Pine Ridge Conservation Center full-time. Olivia had returned to school for environmental law and now specialized in cases involving wildlife protection. Eleanor Whitaker, now in her late 80s and using a wheelchair, sat beside them, her eyes bright with the same curiosity and determination that had led her to break a window to help a family in need all those years ago. Dr. Chen, now the head of a major university's wildlife biology department, stood at the back of the room, arms crossed as she listened to her former mentee speak with a mixture of scientific precision and heartfelt conviction that mirrored her own approach. And Jason Merrick, the magazine writer whose article about the bear child of Pine Ridge had first brought national attention to their story, scribbled notes for the follow-up piece he had been working on for a decade. A book chronicling the remarkable chain of events set in motion by a baby's encounter with a frightened mother bear. As Emma concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause, she revealed her latest initiative, a scholarship program for young people from farming and ranching communities to study wildlife management techniques that allowed for mutual thriving. The program is called Building Bridges, she explained during the Q&A session that followed. Because that's what we need, not walls between our worlds, but passages of understanding. Later that evening, at a reception overlooking the city lights, Jason Merrick caught up with the Bennett family. "Remarkable presentation," he told Emma, raising his glass in a small toast. "You've come a long way from that 6-year-old who told me so matter-of-factly that a bear was saying thank you." Emma laughed, the sound carrying the same unguarded joy that had characterized her as a child. "Well, I hope I've developed a slightly more scientific vocabulary since then." "But not at the expense of that intuition," Merrick observed. "That's what makes your approach unique." Emma's expression grew thoughtful. The science matters. Data, research, evidence. But there's something else too, something harder to measure but just as real. Connection, Olivia supplied, joining the conversation. "Exactly," Emma nodded. "Sierra passed away last winter." Merrick's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. She lived a remarkably long life for a wild bear." 22 years, Emma confirmed. "The tracking data showed she returned to our property one last time before the end. Almost exactly on the winter solstice, like always." "Remarkable consistency," Merrick murmured. "What the data doesn't show," Emma continued, "is that I was there that night. I'd come home from college for winter break and felt, I don't know how to explain it scientifically, a need to go to the forest edge. She was waiting, as if she knew." Noah placed a supportive hand on his daughter's shoulder as she continued. "We stayed like that for almost an hour. Me on my side of the invisible line, her on hers. Then she left, and somehow I knew it was the last time." Emma's voice remained steady despite the emotion behind her words. 3 days later, her tracking collar sent out the mortality signal. The group fell silent, honoring both the story and the bear whose remarkable life had touched so many. "Her oldest daughter has taken over her territory," Dr. Chen added, joining their circle. "And interestingly, she brought her cubs to the same spot at this year's solstice. A tradition being passed down," Merrick suggested. Journalists' curiosity piqued. "Perhaps," Dr. Chen acknowledged with the careful reservation of a scientist. Then, with a glance at Emma, she added, "Or perhaps a bridge being maintained." As the evening wore on and conversations shifted to practical matters of conservation, policy, and funding, Emma found herself drawn to the balcony overlooking the city. The urban landscape before her, all concrete and glass and artificial light, stood in stark contrast to the forest of her childhood. Yet, even here, nature persisted. A peregrine falcon had nested on a nearby skyscraper. Urban foxes haunted the city parks. Life found its way. "Penny for your thoughts?" Noah asked, joining his daughter at the railing. Emma smiled. "I was just thinking about boundaries, how we create them and how sometimes they're necessary, but how often they're just arbitrary lines we draw to make ourselves feel separate and safe." Noah nodded, understanding as always. "Your bear crossed a boundary to find food. You crossed one to offer help. Both of you were just doing what came naturally. And in doing so, we erased the boundary, at least for a moment," Emma concluded. "That's what I want my work to do, not eliminate all boundaries, but make them permeable." crossable when it matters. From inside the reception hall, Olivia called that it was time for the evening's final presentation. As Noah turned to go, Emma lingered for a moment longer, gazing up at the star-scattered sky barely visible through the city's light pollution. Somewhere far from this urban center, in the forests surrounding Pine Ridge, Sierra's descendants were moving through the darkness, living their wild lives according to ancient instincts and newer traditions. And here, in this human realm of policy and science, a child who had once looked into a bear's eyes without fear continued the work of building bridges between worlds. Different species, different lifetimes, different ways of being, yet connected by a single moment of pure recognition that had, like a stone dropped in still water, sent ripples outward beyond anything a 15-month-old child or a frightened mother bear could have imagined. Emma took a deep breath of the night air and smiled. Some boundaries, she knew, were only visible if you chose to see them, and some connections, once formed, transcended all boundaries entirely. She turned and walked back inside, ready to continue the work that had begun in a garage on an ordinary day that had become extraordinary. The day a baby led a bear home, and in doing so found her own path forward. 8 years later, Dr. Emma Bennett stood at the edge of a clearing in the Alaskan wilderness, her breath forming clouds in the crisp autumn air. At 24, she had already earned her doctorate in wildlife biology with a groundbreaking dissertation on interspecies communication and recognition patterns. The work had brought her to this remote research station, thousands of miles from Pine Ridge, where a new challenge awaited. Signals coming in stronger now, called Marcus Tanaka, her research partner, adjusting the antenna in his hands. At 30, Marcus was a brilliant technology specialist who had developed a new type of tracking collar that could not only monitor an animal's location, but also record biometric data indicating emotional states. Bear 42 is heading this way. Emma checked her equipment one last time. After years of preparation, countless grant applications, and overcoming significant skepticism from portions of the scientific community, Operation Threshold was finally underway. Inspired by her lifelong connection with Sierra and her descendants, Emma had developed a revolutionary hypothesis that bears possessed a far more sophisticated capacity for memory, recognition, and emotional processing than previously believed, and that with the right approach, meaningful communication between species might be possible. Remember, she cautioned Marcus and the small team of researchers positioned strategically around the clearing. Absolute minimum movement. We're observers today, nothing more. Bear 42, a mature female grizzly they'd nicknamed Athena, had been selected for the first trial because of her unusual history. Like Sierra years before, she had experienced a significant positive interaction with humans when wildlife officials saved her from a poacher's snare 3 years earlier. Emma's theory suggested this might have created a foundation of trust that could be built upon. The protocol they developed was rigorous and cautious. No direct interaction at first, simply habituating Athena to human presence at increasing proximity over weeks. Then, carefully controlled trials using sound and scent markers to establish recognition patterns. Only if those proved successful would they attempt the final phase, direct engagement through specific gestural communication. Emma's colleagues in the academic world had been divided on her approach. Some dismissed it as anthropomorphizing, projecting human characteristics onto wild animals. Others, particularly the younger generation of biologists who had grown up reading about the Pine Ridge Bear Project, were electrified by the possibilities. Dr. Rachel Chen, now in her 60s and serving as Emma's long-distance advisor on the project, had offered the most balanced perspective. Science advances not just through caution, but also through bold hypotheses. Test it rigorously, document meticulously, and let the data speak. A movement at the tree line snapped Emma back to the present moment. A massive grizzly emerged cautiously into the clearing, her brown fur catching the golden afternoon light. Even at the prescribed safe distance, Athena's power and presence were awe-inspiring. Emma felt the familiar quickening of her pulse. Not fear, but that same inexplicable connection she had first experienced as a baby. Over the years, she had encountered dozens of bears through her work, and while she maintained appropriate scientific caution with all of them, certain individuals seemed to recognize something in her as well, as if they could somehow sense her history. For the next hour, the team observed as Athena explored the clearing, occasionally glancing toward their observation posts but showing no signs of aggression or undue stress. The new biometric collar transmitted data to their computers, baseline readings that would be compared with future encounters. Blood pressure and cortisol levels normal, Marcus murmured, eyes on his tablet. She's curious but not afraid. When Athena finally ambled back into the forest, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Phase 1 had been successful. The bear had tolerated human presence at a distance that would gradually be decreased in subsequent trials. That evening, as the research team gathered in the station's common room to review data, a satellite call came through from Pine Ridge. Emma excused herself to take it privately, recognizing her mother's number. "How did it go?" Olivia asked immediately, her face slightly pixelated on the small screen, but her excitement clear. Emma couldn't help but smile. Though her parents had respected her need to establish her own scientific credentials apart from the family story, they remained her most enthusiastic supporters. "Textbook first contact," she replied. Athena was calm, curious, receptive. The biometric data looks promising. "Your father's sorry he missed the call. He's at the center with a school group. They're installing new habitat enrichment features in the rehabilitation enclosure." They chatted for a few minutes about family matters before Olivia's expression grew more serious. "There's something else you should know," she said, hesitating slightly. "Jason Merrick's book is finally being published next month." Emma nodded, unsurprised. The journalist had spent nearly 2 decades chronicling the Pine Ridge story and its aftermath. "That's good, isn't it? More awareness for conservation efforts." "Yes, but—" Olivia paused. "He's included some new information. About Sierra's daughter, Willow, the one who took over her territory. The tracking data shows she's been making that solstice visit to our property with increasing frequency. Not just once a year anymore." Emma felt a flutter of something indefinable in her chest. "How often?" "Monthly, according to Dr. Chen's team. Always at night, always careful to maintain distance from the house. But she's coming regularly and bringing her cubs." Emma sat with this information, turning it over in her mind. "Is this public knowledge?" "Not yet. Rachel has kept it out of the official reports, concerned about drawing tourism or disruption. But Jason knows, and he thinks it's important to the story he's telling." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus poked his head in, expression apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got something unusual in the data stream. Thought you'd want to see it right away." "I'll call you back," Emma promised her mother, ending the call with the sense of unfinished business hanging in the air. In the main lab, the team had gathered around the primary monitor where Athena's biometric data was displayed alongside a synchronized video feed from the clearing's cameras. "We were reviewing the footage from just before Athena left," Marcus explained, "and noticed this peculiar pattern." He pointed to a spike in brain activity that corresponded with the bear's final glance toward Emma's observation post. "Could be coincidence," suggested Darlene Montoya, their neurobiologist, but it's reminiscent of recognition patterns we see in social mammals encountering familiar individuals. Emma studied the data, careful to maintain scientific objectivity despite the excitement building within her. Let's not jump to conclusions, but flag this for comparison with future encounters. If we see it again, it would suggest she specifically recognized you, Marcus finished, the implication hanging in the air. That night, Emma lay awake in her small cabin, mind racing with the day's events and her mother's news about Willow's increased visits to the Bennett property. The logical part of her brain cautioned against reading too much into either situation. Both could have perfectly reasonable explanations that had nothing to do with special recognition or memory. Yet something deeper, more intuitive, whispered otherwise. The same intuition that had guided her as a baby, as a child, and now as a scientist pursuing questions others might consider fringe. The next morning, Emma made a decision. While the rest of the team prepared for the day's observations, she placed a private call to Jason Merrick. "Dr. Bennett," he answered, his face appearing on her tablet screen. Older, but still carrying the same intense curiosity she remembered. "This is unexpected." "Mom told me about your book," she said without preamble, "and about Willow's increased visits." Merrick nodded, unperturbed by her directness. "I was planning to reach out before publication. There's a chapter I'd like you to review, about the potential implications of multi-generational memory in bears." "That's actually why I'm calling. I've been developing a new theory based on my work here, and I think it might connect to what you're seeing with Willow." Emma outlined her hypothesis that certain profound experiences could create neural pathways in bears similar to cultural memory in humans, and that these could potentially be passed down through observation and learning to subsequent generations. "You're suggesting Sierra taught Willow to visit your property? To remember the connection?" Merrick asked, journalist's skepticism balanced with evident fascination. "I'm suggesting it's a possibility worth exploring," Emma clarified. "And if I'm right, it has profound implications for understanding wildlife behavior and human-animal relationships." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation shifting from speculative to deeply scientific and back again. By the end, they had reached an agreement. Merrick would delay his book by 6 months to include Emma's Alaskan research, and in return, she would share her data and theories with him in real time, giving him unprecedented access to her work. "One last question," Merrick said before they ended the call. "The scientific establishment still views your Sierra connection with some skepticism. Aren't you concerned that linking your current research too closely with that personal history might undermine your credibility?" Emma smiled, a confidence in her expression that hadn't been there when she was 16. "Science advances when we ask the questions others are afraid to ask, Mr. Merrick. I've spent my life being careful to separate my personal experience from my professional work. But what if that experience wasn't just an emotional memory? What if it was my first piece of scientific data?" The next few months saw Operation Threshold progress with remarkable success. Athena not only tolerated decreasing distance from human observers, but began to display what appeared to be intentional communication. Specific head movements and body postures that occurred consistently in response to particular situations. By early winter, Emma's team had compiled enough data to justify moving to the final phase. Direct engagement through the gestural communication. The protocol called for Emma, as lead researcher, to approach within 50 feet of Athena in the clearing and attempt to establish deliberate communication using specific hand signals they had been modeling from a distance. The morning of the attempt dawned clear and cold, the Alaskan landscape transformed by the season's first significant snowfall. Emma's team was subdued, everyone acutely aware of both the scientific importance and physical risk of what they were about to attempt. Biometric readings normal, Marcus reported as they picked up Athena's signal approaching the clearing. She seems calm today. Emma zipped her heavy parka and checked the tranquilizer rifle that Ranger Jordan Blackfoot carried as their safety measure of last resort. The native Alaskan man had initially been the most skeptical of their project, but had gradually become one of its strongest advocates as he witnessed Athena's responses. Remember, Emma addressed the team one final time. No matter what happens today, this project has already yielded valuable data about bear cognition and behavior. If I need to abort the approach for any reason, there's no shame in that. As Athena appeared at the edge of the clearing, Emma began her carefully measured walk from the blind where she had been waiting. Each step followed the protocol they had meticulously developed. Slow, deliberate movements with clear visibility. At the prescribed distance, she stopped and performed the first gestural signal, a slow raising of both hands, palms forward, then lowered to waist height. In their previous observations, this movement had preceded the delivery of food to a designated spot in the clearing. Athena watched, massive head tilted slightly in what appeared to be attention. After a moment's consideration, the bear moved with deliberate steps to the delivery location and sat back on her haunches, exactly the response they had been hoping for. Carefully maintaining the slow pace established in their protocol, Emma reached into her pack and removed a sealed container of fresh berries and salmon pieces, which she placed on the ground before backing away. Athena approached the food but didn't immediately eat, instead watching Emma with that same intense focus. Emma performed the second gesture sequence, a sweeping motion with her right arm followed by a gentle tap of her left shoulder. In their observation sessions, this had been paired with verbal data collection. Researchers speaking softly into their recorders after Athena had received food. What happened next would be reviewed and debated in wildlife biology circles for years to come. Athena, having watched the gesture, raised her right paw and brought it across her body to touch her left shoulder, a mirror of the human movement that appeared far too precise to be coincidental. In the observation blind, Marcus whispered urgently into his headset, "Tell me someone else is seeing this." Emma maintained her composure with effort, heart racing as she continued through the protocol. For nearly 20 minutes, she and Athena engaged in a series of gestural exchanges, some mirrored by the bear, others acknowledged with specific movements that the team had documented in previous sessions. When the interaction concluded and Emma had safely returned to the blind, the team's scientific reserve finally broke. Darlene was openly crying. Marcus kept repeating "unprecedented" under his breath, and even Ranger Blackfoot stood speechless, the tranquilizer rifle forgotten in his hands. "It worked," Emma said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She understood. That evening, as the team worked feverishly to document every aspect of the historic interaction, Emma slipped away to place a call that couldn't wait for their scheduled check-in. Dr. Rachel Chen answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Tell me," she said without greeting. "We did it, Rachel," Emma replied, unable to keep the emotion from her voice now. Deliberate, reciprocal communication with a wild bear. Athena mirrored my gestures, responded to signaling sequences, maintained engagement for the full protocol duration. The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could have been there to see it. We recorded everything from multiple angles. I'm sending the files now." They discussed the technical aspects for several minutes before Rachel's expression softened. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Something that happened today, just hours before your trial with Athena." Emma felt a prickle of premonition. "What is it?" "Willow came to your parents' property this morning. In daylight, Emma, and she wasn't alone. Her cubs, Emma guessed. Not just cubs, another adult female, one we've been tracking separately, designated F224, but based on genetic samples and age estimates. Rachel paused, scientific caution warring with evident wonder. Emma, we believe she's one of Sierra's original cubs, from that day in your garage 24 years ago. Emma sank into her chair, the implications washing over her. Sierra's daughter and granddaughter together, visiting the place where it all began. On the exact day you attempted communication with Athena, Rachel added quietly, thousands of miles away. The coincidence, if it was coincidence, seemed too profound to be random chance. Emma's mind raced with possibilities, theories forming and reforming as she tried to process the connection. There's more, Rachel continued. Your father was home when they appeared. He said Willow stopped at the exact spot where you used to meet Sierra, looked directly at the house and made a specific gesture. What kind of gesture? Emma asked, barely breathing. She raised her right paw and touched her left shoulder. The identical movement Athena had made in the clearing hours earlier sent a shockwave through Emma's system. Thousands of miles apart, two bears with no connection to each other, making the same specific gesture on the same day. A gesture that Emma herself had incorporated into her communication protocol. That's not possible, she whispered, scientist and wonderstruck child momentarily occupying the same space in her consciousness. And yet it happened, Rachel replied simply. I've spent my career being skeptical, Emma. You know that. But sometimes we encounter phenomena that challenge our existing frameworks of understanding. When the call ended, Emma stood at the window of her cabin, gazing at the star-filled Alaskan sky. The same stars would be visible over Pine Ridge, she realized. The same cosmos spanning the vast distance between her current work and the place where her journey began. The next morning, as the team prepared for another observation session with Athena, Emma made a decision. She gathered everyone in the main cabin, including Jason Merrick, who had flown in overnight after receiving her urgent message. I need to tell you a story, she began. The complete story of how this project really began. Not just with a scientific hypothesis, but with a baby who looked into a bear's eyes and saw something looking back. For the next hour, she shared the full account of her lifelong connection with Sierra and her descendants. Not the sanitized version that had appeared in scientific journals, but the raw, unfiltered truth, including the inexplicable parallels between Athena's behavior and Willow's appearance at her family home. When she finished, the room was silent, each person processing the implications in their own way. It was Ranger Blackfoot who finally spoke, his weathered face thoughtful. My grandmother used to tell stories of the old ones who could speak with Brother Bear, he said quietly. The elders called it walking between worlds, those rare individuals who could understand the language of animals. We dismissed these as legends, but perhaps they were observations, passed down through generations. Darlene Montoya, ever the rigorous neurobiologist, added, there are measurable similarities in mammalian brain structures across species, shared neural pathways for emotions, recognition, even rudimentary symbolic thinking. Is it so impossible that deeper connection could exist, given the right circumstances? Marcus looked up from his tablet where he'd been reviewing data. We have the technology now to document what happens during these interactions. Brain activity, hormone levels, physiological responses. Whatever this is, we can study it systematically. Emma felt a weight lifting that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying, the burden of keeping her personal experience separate from her scientific work. Then that's what we'll do. Study it, document it, follow the evidence wherever it leads. Jason Merrick, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. This goes beyond a book now. This is a fundamental shift in how we understand our relationship with other species. If we can prove it, Emma cautioned, scientist reasserting herself, we'll need rigorous protocols, multiple test subjects, independent verification. And if you do prove it, Jason pressed, what then? Emma looked around at her team, seeing not skepticism but shared purpose in their faces. Then we acknowledge that the boundaries between species are more permeable than we thought. That communication, real communication, is possible. And that changes everything. Wildlife management, conservation policy, perhaps even our fundamental understanding of consciousness itself. Over the next year, Operation Threshold expanded beyond Athena to include multiple bears across different regions. Emma developed increasingly sophisticated communication protocols, while Marcus refined the biometric monitoring technology to capture more subtle neural activities. The scientific community's reaction was predictably mixed. Some dismissed the work as pseudoscience despite the rigorous methodology. Others approached with cautious interest. A small but growing number of researchers began similar work with other species, wolves, elephants, cetaceans, using Emma's protocols as a starting point. Through it all, the connection between the bears in Alaska and those in Pine Ridge persisted in ways that defied conventional explanation. Gestures introduced in one location would sometimes appear spontaneously in the other. Behavioral changes occurred in parallel, despite the geographic separation. On the one-year anniversary of her first direct communication with Athena, Emma returned to Pine Ridge for a brief visit home. The Conservation Center had grown, now featuring an international research facility specializing in human-wildlife conflict resolution. Noah had stepped back from day-to-day management to focus on his new role as a consultant for similar centers being established worldwide. The morning after her arrival, Emma woke before dawn, driven by the same intuition that had guided her throughout her life. Dressing quietly, she made her way to the edge of the property, to the spot where generations of bears had come to acknowledge a connection that began with a frightened mother and a fearless baby. The forest was silent in the pre-dawn light, mist clinging to the ground in ethereal wisps. Emma waited, patient and still, as she had learned to be through years of fieldwork. Her scientific mind cataloged the sounds around her, birds beginning their morning chorus, small creatures rustling in the underbrush, the distant call of a fox. Yet it was something else that alerted her to the approaching presence, not a sound or sight, but a feeling, an awareness that had developed over a lifetime of such moments. Willow emerged from the trees with deliberate grace, larger than Sierra had been but with the same intelligent eyes. Behind her walked a nearly grown female cub, and, to Emma's amazement, a smaller bear that could only be a grand cub, the third generation descended from Sierra. The three bears stopped at what had become their traditional distance, close enough for clear observation but maintaining the respectful boundary that characterized their unusual relationship with humans. Willow's gaze fixed on Emma with unmistakable recognition. Slowly, deliberately, Emma raised her hands in the first greeting gesture she had developed with Athena, palms forward, then lowered to waist height. Without hesitation, Willow rose onto her hind legs and mirrored the movement, massive paws extending before lowering in perfect synchronization. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was not a bear that had been trained or conditioned through her research protocols. This was a wild animal who had somehow learned the gesture through means science could not yet explain. For nearly 15 minutes, Emma and Willow engaged in a series of gestural exchanges that felt less like an experiment and more like a conversation between old friends. The younger bears watched attentively, occasionally mimicking the movements themselves, as if learning a language passed down through generations. When the extraordinary encounter finally concluded, Willow made one final gesture, different from the established protocol. She placed her paw over her chest, held it there for several seconds, then turned and led her family back into the forest. Emma stood motionless long after they had disappeared, tears streaming silently down her face. The gesture was unmistakable in its meaning, transcending species barriers with its universal simplicity. A paw over the heart, connection, recognition, perhaps even love. Later that day, as the Bennett family gathered for dinner, Emma finally shared the full details of her morning encounter and the breakthrough it represented. It wasn't just mimicry, she explained, still processing the implications herself. It was intentional communication, and that final gesture, it wasn't part of any protocol I've established. That came from Willow. "What do you think it means?" Noah asked, his expression a mixture of wonder and fatherly pride. Emma considered the question carefully. "I think it means we've been asking the wrong questions all along. We've been so focused on whether animals can learn to communicate with us that we haven't considered they might already have been communicating, and we simply weren't listening correctly." Olivia reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You've been listening since you were 15 months old, Emma. Maybe that's why they chose you." That night, Emma called Marcus in Alaska with instructions to modify their research protocols. "We need to be more receptive," she explained. "Less prescription, more observation. Let them show us their natural communication patterns before we impose our own." The revised approach yielded immediate results. Within weeks, Athena and the other bears in the study began displaying a consistent set of gestures that researchers hadn't previously documented, movements that appeared to have specific meanings within bear communities. "It's a language," Darlene confirmed after analyzing hundreds of hours of footage. "Not like human language with grammar and syntax, but a sophisticated system of gestural communication with consistent meanings across different bear populations." As winter approached, bringing the research season in Alaska to a necessary pause, Emma received unexpected news. The MacArthur Foundation had selected her for their prestigious Genius Grant, providing significant funding to expand her work. More surprisingly, the International Union for Conservation of Biology had invited her to address their global conference, not just as a speaker but as the keynote presenter. "They want you to present the full scope of your findings," Jason Merrick informed her, having become something between a colleague and chronicler of her work. Including the Pine Ridge connection and the cross-location communication patterns, they're calling it a potential paradigm shift in how we understand animal cognition. The recognition from mainstream scientific organizations represented a turning point, acknowledgement that her work, however unconventional in its origins, had produced results that could no longer be dismissed. As she prepared her presentation over the following months, Emma found herself working closely with Dr. Chen to integrate decades of data from Pine Ridge with her more recent findings in Alaska. Together, they developed a comprehensive model of bear communication and cognition that challenged fundamental assumptions about the barriers between human and animal consciousness. The night before the conference, Emma found herself unable to sleep, mind racing with the magnitude of what tomorrow might bring. She slipped out of her hotel room and made her way to a small park nearby, seeking the comfort of trees and open sky that had become essential to her well-being during years of fieldwork. To her surprise, she found Rachel Chen already there, seated on a bench and gazing up at the stars. "Couldn't sleep either?" the older woman asked, making room beside her. Emma smiled, taking the offered seat. "Too much riding on tomorrow." "You know," Rachel said after a comfortable silence, "when I first met you, You were barely talking in complete sentences. Your parents were still shaken from the garage incident, and you were this tiny thing clutching a stuffed bear and staring at me like you could see right through all my scientific credentials to something more essential. I don't remember that, Emma admitted. You wouldn't, but I do. You walked right up to me, held out that stuffed bear, and said, "Bah," clear as day. And something about the way you looked at me. Rachel shook her head slightly. I'd been studying bears for years by then, but that was the moment I started wondering if I'd been missing something fundamental. Emma turned to look at her mentor, seeing not just the distinguished scientist but the woman who had helped shape her path. You took a chance on a story that must have sounded impossible. Science isn't just about what we can prove at any given moment, Rachel replied. It's about remaining open to possibilities that might expand our understanding. Your experience offered a hypothesis worth testing. That's all good science needs to begin. The next morning, Emma stood before an audience of the world's leading wildlife biologists, conservationists, and policymakers. The hall was packed beyond capacity, with additional viewers watching via live stream in overflow rooms and online. 24 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. A frightened bear and a fearless baby had an encounter that defied conventional understanding. For the next hour, she presented the culmination of her life's work, from that first connection in a garage to the sophisticated communication protocols now being implemented in research sites around the world. She shared videos of gestural exchanges between humans and bears, brain activity data showing parallel neural responses, and tracking information demonstrating the remarkable parallel behaviors between populations separated by thousands of miles. What we're witnessing isn't just learned behavior, she explained, advancing to her key findings. It appears to be the emergence of a cross-species communication system, one that both humans and bears can access given the right circumstances and approach. The evidence she presented was methodical and compelling. Multiple bears in different locations displaying the same communicative behaviors, consistent interpretations of gestures across research teams, and clear indications of intentionality in the bear's responses. But perhaps most remarkable, Emma continued, reaching the most controversial aspect of her research, is the evidence suggesting information transfer between bear populations with no direct contact. Gestures introduced in Alaska appearing spontaneously in Pine Ridge bears. Behavioral patterns emerging in parallel despite geographic separation. She paused, knowing the significance of what she was about to propose. The data suggests a form of connection we don't yet have the scientific framework to fully explain. Some have called it intuitive, others spiritual. My team refers to it as the network hypothesis, the possibility that bears, and perhaps other highly intelligent mammals, share information through mechanisms we haven't yet identified. As the presentation concluded and the lengthy Q&A session began, Emma was struck by the shift in response from the scientific community. Where once there had been dismissal or skepticism, now there were thoughtful questions, requests for collaboration, and genuine engagement with the implications of her findings. Later that evening, at the conference reception, Emma found herself surrounded by researchers eager to discuss potential applications of her protocols with other species. Wolves in Yellowstone, elephants in Kenya, great apes in rehabilitation centers. Dr. Eliza Nakamura, a prominent primatologist, summarized the emerging consensus. What you've demonstrated isn't just about bears, Dr. Bennett. It's about reconsidering our entire approach to animal cognition and interspecies relationships. If this level of communication is possible, we've been underestimating the capabilities of the creatures with whom we share this planet. As the excitement of the conference faded and Emma returned to her fieldwork, a new chapter began. Research centers around the world began implementing variations of her communication protocols with different species. A global database was established to track gestural communications across populations. Conservation policies began to shift, incorporating new understanding of animal cognition into habitat management decisions. 5 years later, Emma stood once again at the edge of the Bennett property, this time accompanied by a diverse team of researchers from around the world. The Pine Ridge site had been designated as the headquarters for the Interspecies Communication Initiative, a global effort to expand understanding of animal cognition and develop frameworks for coexistence based on mutual recognition rather than dominance. Willow, now a matriarch with multiple generations of descendants, continued her regular visits to the property edge. Her grand cubs had grown and established territories of their own, each maintaining the unusual connection with humans that had begun with Sierra decades earlier. Emma, at 34, had become the leading voice in her field, her work expanding beyond bears to encompass a wide range of species. Yet she never lost sight of where it all began, with a baby who looked into a bear's eyes without fear and recognized another consciousness looking back. On this particular morning, as visiting researchers set up observation equipment at a respectful distance, Emma made her way alone to the familiar meeting spot. Willow was already waiting, her massive form partially concealed by morning mist that gave the scene an otherworldly quality. "Hello, old friend," Emma said softly, beginning the gestural greeting that had become ritualized over years of encounters. Willow responded with the familiar movements, then added something new, a sequence of gestures that Emma hadn't seen before. The researchers behind her murmured in excitement, cameras capturing every moment of this unexpected development. Emma watched carefully, memorizing the sequence to analyze later. But beyond the scientific observation, she felt the same connection that had guided her since childhood, that wordless understanding that transcended language, species, and the artificial boundaries humans had constructed between themselves and the natural world. As Willow concluded her communication and prepared to return to the forest, Emma was struck by a profound realization. The breakthrough that had defined her career wasn't teaching bears to communicate with humans. It was learning how to listen when they had been communicating all along. That evening, as the research team reviewed footage of the morning's interaction, Dr. Chen, now in her 70s but still actively involved in the project, offered an observation that would become central to Emma's evolving understanding. "What if this isn't just about communication?" she suggested, watching the video of Willow's new gestural sequence. "What if it's about shared consciousness? Different forms of awareness recognizing each other across the species barrier?" The question resonated with Emma, opening new pathways of exploration that would guide her work for years to come. If bears could recognize and communicate with humans at this level, what did it suggest about consciousness itself? Was awareness not a uniquely human trait but something that manifested in different forms across species? And if so, what responsibility did that understanding place on humanity as just one participant in a complex network of conscious beings? These questions would define the next phase of Emma's career, leading her beyond communication protocols into more philosophical and ethical dimensions of human-animal relationships. She established the Center for Interspecies Ethics at the University of Montana, bringing together biologists, philosophers, indigenous knowledge keepers, and policymakers to reconsider humanity's place within the natural world. Jason Merrick, who had chronicled her journey from the beginning, published what would become a landmark book, The Bear Whisperer: How Emma Bennett Redefined the Boundaries Between Species. The work was translated into 42 languages and became required reading in university programs around the world. inspiring a new generation of researchers to approach their study of animals with humility and openness to unexpected forms of connection. On Emma's 40th birthday, her parents hosted a gathering at the Pine Ridge home where it had all begun. The Conservation Center had expanded to include an international research campus, and the surrounding forest now comprised one of the most successful bear sanctuaries in North America. With strict protocols in place to prevent habituation or dependency, the bears of Pine Ridge had become a model population, wild and self-sufficient, yet engaged in an unprecedented relationship with the human community that shared their environment. As twilight fell, Emma slipped away from the celebration to visit the forest edge one last time before returning to her research station in Montana the following day. The familiar path felt like a meditation, each step connecting her to memories that had shaped her life's trajectory. To her surprise, she found Noah already there, gazing into the gathering darkness of the trees. "Thought I might find you here," he said with a smile, making room for her beside him on the weathered bench that had been installed years ago for observations. "Old habits," Emma admitted, settling next to her father. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before Noah spoke again. "You know, all those years ago, when you crawled into that garage, your mother and I were terrified. We thought we'd lost you." He shook his head at the memory. "But you knew something we didn't. Something it's taken science decades to catch up with." "What's that?" Emma asked, though she suspected his answer. "That fear is what truly separates us. Strip that away, and connection becomes possible across barriers we thought were impenetrable." He glanced at his daughter, pride evident in his expression. "You've never been afraid to reach across those barriers, Em. Even as a baby, you saw beyond them." A rustling in the underbrush interrupted their conversation. Both father and daughter fell silent, their attention drawn to the shadowy edge where lawn met wilderness. Willow emerged slowly into the fading light, her massive form silhouetted against the darkening forest. But tonight, she wasn't alone. Behind her came not just her own offspring, but what appeared to be multiple family groups, bears of different ages and sizes moving with deliberate grace into the clearing. Emma's breath caught in her throat. In all the years of encounters, she had never witnessed such a gathering. She counted quickly. 9 adult bears and several cubs, arranging themselves in a loose semicircle at the forest's edge. Noah reached for his daughter's hand, speechless at the unprecedented assembly. "Dad," Emma whispered, "this isn't random. They've never gathered like this before." As if confirming her assessment, Willow moved forward slightly, separating herself from the group. The massive bear rose onto her hind legs, a position that would trigger alarm in any other context, but here carried a different meaning. She remained upright for several seconds, surveying the two humans with an intensity that transcended species. Then, with deliberate movements, she began a series of gestures that Emma recognized from her research, but strung together in a way she had never documented. The other bears remained motionless, as if bearing witness to something significant. "She's saying goodbye," Emma realized suddenly, the understanding washing over her with absolute certainty. "How do you know?" Noah asked softly. "I just know." Emma rose slowly to her feet, emotion threatening to overwhelm her scientific detachment. The tracking data showed signs of age-related decline in her last checkup. "She's old now, Dad. For a wild bear, she's lived an extraordinarily long life." Willow completed her communication and dropped back to all fours. For a long moment, she held Emma's gaze across the distance that had always been maintained between them, a boundary respected by both species through decades of their unusual relationship. Then, with a deliberateness that could not be mistaken, Willow did something unprecedented. She took 3 steps forward, crossing the invisible line that had defined their interactions for a quarter-century. Emma stood perfectly still, aware of the profound significance of this moment. The bear approached until barely 10 feet separated them, close enough that Emma could see the gray fur around her muzzle, smell her wild scent on the evening air, hear the soft pad of her massive paws on the grass. There, Willow stopped and lowered her head slightly, an unmistakable invitation that defied all protocols and scientific caution. Noah tensed beside her, years of paternal protection warring with his trust in the connection he had witnessed throughout his daughter's life. "Emma," he began, uncertainty in his voice. "It's okay, Dad," she said with quiet certainty. "This is what my entire life has been leading to." With slow, deliberate movements, Emma closed the remaining distance between them. Standing before Willow, she raised her hand, not in one of the research gestures, but in the simple, intuitive motion of a human reaching out to touch another being. Her palm came to rest gently on Willow's massive head, fingers sinking into the coarse fur between her ears. The moment of physical contact, the first in all their years of communication, sent a wave of emotion through Emma so powerful she nearly lost her balance. It was as if some circuit had been completed, some ancient connection restored that transcended the divisions between human and animal, civilization and wilderness. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she stood in perfect communion with this wild creature who had carried forward a legacy begun before Emma could even speak. A legacy of recognition across the boundaries that separated species.